Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho vijacharana sampanno sugato lokavidu anuttaro purisa dhamma sarati satta deva manusama buddho bhagavati svakato bhagavata dhammo sanditiko akaliko ehipasiko opanaiko pachatang veditabo vinyuhiti supatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho ujupatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho nyayapatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho Samicipatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho yaridam chatari purisa yugani atta purisa pungala esa bhagavato savaka sangho ahuneyo pahuneyo takineyo Anjali Karanyo Anuttarang Punyaketang Lokasati. So I'm going to do a little bit of guidance during this sit because it's going to be something we're going to be talking about is practice-oriented thing. And I personally am not a big fan of guided meditation, so I try not to torture you with it. But, well, I'd like for you to try to work with Anapana tonight, mindfulness of the breath. And I'm going to go through some movement through the body in some specific ways, and I'll try not to be in the way too much with my voice. So I'll start off and then I'll give you further instructions as I go. So let's start with just being aware of the touch of the breath around the nostrils. Breathing in, feel the touch of the breath, and breathing out, feeling the touch of the breath. Now I'd like to, when we breathe in through the nose, and then move our awareness to our forehead when we breathe out. So in to the nose, out to the forehead. In the nose, out the forehead. If you can't feel anything, just keep trying. It's not no judgment. Now in through the forehead and out through the top of the head. through the top of the head, and then on the out breath, just try to experience the whole head as much as you can. You can breathe down, let it drop on your exhale into your noggin. Now breathing in again through the nose, and on the exhale, go down your left arm out your left hand. Into the nose and down the right arm, out the right hand. Now alternate left and right, left and right. On the exhale, try to use that sweep as just any place of tension, or relax that out, breathe that out. Through the nose, and then take it down through the torso, out down into your belly, your abdomen. If you get stuck anywhere along the way, just keep moving through it, keep moving through it. Don't concern yourself with any block spot or miss spot. Just keep starting with the starting point and ending with the ending point the best you can. And the nose out through the belly. let's bring it in through the abdomen and then go down to the left leg. Into your abdomen and down to your right leg. And let's alternate left and right leg into the belly, down left, down right, left, right. I'd like to just do a slight change. We're going to try to find the subtlest tingly sensations in our body. Usually they're in the hands or around the mouth and nose. I would recommend the hands if you can't find anything. And just in and out, being aware of the subtlest tingly little sensations in your hands and face. going to kind of combine the two. So you breathe in the center where this tingly may be in your hands, and try to push it up your arm as far as you can go to where it stops being tingly. Just keep moving back and forth in from the central point of its activity and moving it further up the arm. Left arm, right arm, both arms, it doesn't matter. Try to take where it's most predominant and move it where it's not. Move your awareness with those subtlest tingly sensations. Search your body for the places where this may be. Kind of free will it anywhere you find this, maybe this subtleness. Try to move it around, knead it around, in and out. Try to pervade that subtle feeling as many places as you can.
Pramasa Mukati Pati Sahampati Atandali Anadevaram Ayatata Antita Patakara Sata Satika Desetutamam Anukam Tamam Jam.
Namo tassa bhagavato arhato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arhato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arhato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. One of the aspects of the Buddhist teaching that, at least how I see it, I think it's probably because of the way I was raised, partially. My dad was in the military and I had some athletic background as well, played ice hockey. And the Buddha was from a military background, and he's often using the word training, sikha. And the Anapanasati Sutta is full of this. There's 16 steps in the Anapanasati Sutta. The first two are just around awareness of the in and out, long or short, but then after that it gets into training. And the current kind of environment of especially lay Buddhist practice is the idea of just being mindful, this idea of just being aware. I think if you really take on the Buddhist teaching in a comprehensive way, you'll see how that there is a much more active process of training involved. And what this guided meditation was trying to give you a little flavor of how that's done, can be done. And what I'm going to, I think, talk about is a little more depth of that, and also how I think in some ways we're constrained by the weaknesses of the translations that we have in the English language. I don't really think we can lay it at the feet of the translators, because I think, first of all, they've done a very amazing job of taking something that is quite sublime. The human experience is not something that's easily described, and they've tried to put it into words. And I don't think our language is particularly designed to express that. I think Pali is. So I'm going to probably go over as well some of the words in particular that I think cause problems to Westerners. So let's see where maybe I can. I think about this a lot, and it's kind of hard to kind of jump off, because it's kind of like a black hole in a certain way. But I think let's look at the Anapana in particular. The third step of the 16 steps is breathing in. One is aware of the whole body, and breathing out, one is aware of the whole body. So often we're taught to be aware of a point. And you also see this in the jhana description, how all four of the jhana descriptions are pervasive, full bodily awarenesses under different levels of subtlety. And so what we're really needing to do is actually cultivate a way of achieving that full bodily awareness. Now, what might obstruct us from doing that? Now, the fourth step is, I think, related to that. It's kind of a way of how to give. It points to the depth of how to solve that problem. It's calming the bodily formations he breathes in, calming the bodily formations he breathes out. Now, what are formations? It's a very tough question. Often people think of this as just the thoughts of the mind, but the depth of the problem is actually quite deeper than that. If we look at Paticca Samuppada, you have ignorance gives rise to formations, formations gives rise to consciousness. And so if we're actually talking about being conscious of the body, there's really quite a lot here to unpack and figure out. And then this is quite central to the teaching, and as it's said by Sariputta in the Greater Discourse on Questions and Answers, he says that wisdom or discernment is to be developed and consciousness is to be understood. So, what is consciousness? What is formations? Now we have kind of two, I've left you out here with two kind of open-ended things. And let's see if we can try to fill in the gaps there. Now, the Western mind thinks of consciousness. If I says he's unconscious, we think of somebody who is out, who's not awake. But this isn't the consciousness as the Buddha is describing. Consciousness in the Buddha's description is arising in dependence on the eye base or the ear base and an external object. So I'll use this as an example. One is, this is the bell we have here. And to actually use the Pali is actually quite useful. The word for consciousness is vijnana. And jnana means to know. And the prefix means divide. So it's to know in a divided way. So it's to separate something out of the world. So I'm conscious of this as a bell. When I'm conscious of this, I'm not conscious of other things. So it's a lifting up of something out of the field of the sense base. So when we describe consciousness in the Buddha's dispensation, it's being conscious of something in the field of experience. Now, in the Paticca what gives rise to that is formations. And so you can see the only way you can be conscious of something is if you put it together, you form it. And so this is the underlying principle that is necessary for consciousness to be. So in this, back into the Anapanasati Sutta, you have this stilling of formations. So most people, I would say, generally don't have full bodily awareness. It takes quite a lot of practice to kind of usually generally develop that in a pervasive way. And that's because there's usually conceiving of separate parts of the body. And so one of the things that you can do in this Anapana is by moving around, is you're actually trying to unify different parts of the experience in and of itself and get beyond conceiving of parts, conceiving of the hand, conceiving of the arm, conceiving of the head, conceiving of the abdomen. Those actual conceivings prohibit you from experiencing the whole body. Now the other word that's kind of problematic in this way with in addition is the idea of concentration, samadhi. Now we typically have this as being like one point or fixed on a single point. And I think it's a much better way to look at it if you look at how the Buddha describes multiple types of meditations. They're thematic meditations. So you're lifting up a particular theme. And so like picking up something like subtle sensations in the body or a particular feeling in the body or metta. These kind of things are objects of meditation as opposed to points of meditation, because one of the things deconstructing the formations does is it kind of throws the idea of a place out the window. And this is actually ultimately the goal. After the fourth jhana, where one has completely dissolved the body and actually transcended the conceiving of forms, one is left in that's what gives you into boundless space. Space really doesn't have any kind of, because space really is entirely and when one is bound by forms like the bell and myself, I have this idea of like there's this much space between here and now. There's that much space between me and you. There's this much space in the room. There's an idea of space between here and Thunder Bay. All of those ideas of space are confined by conceivings of form. So by transcending the idea of formations, this is the part of the process that the Buddha gets us to move even into formless meditations. So as a, seeing it like from a military kind of training way, or like, I would say as hockey, like you work on your fundamentals, you're working on passing, you're working on shooting, you're working on breakouts, you work on basic kind of things, and then that gives you the idea of how to do a specific strategy on offense or a specific strategy on defense. The Buddha's doing this the same way, like many people often tell me when I talk about like the Buddha's teaching, they're like how inaccessible it is. And I think it's unfortunately because I know from the teachings himself, he's talking to a broad strata of individuals. And it's really kind of, I think, the misinterpretations of the words, because I really think that when he's talking to them, that they understand it. Just as we have a conversation like this, it's a little, maybe a little still beyond your general way of talking about things, but some of the words that we use in the translations kind of imprison us into like certain preconceived notions. So often when we're trying to relate to them, it's better to try to really relate to them in terms of our practical experience. So another example of something I didn't want to overdo with the Anapana, but to get you to a full bodily kind of awareness, is working with the expansion and contraction of the breath. And that's typically done best with the belly. And we stayed there for a little while. But that idea of expanding and contracting, you can really dial into that feeling. And by dialing into that feeling, you'll soon start to know that that feeling of expansion and contraction can eventually take over and pervade the entire body. And this is another way one can get to a full bodily awareness. If you take on your practice in this way with Anapana as well, it's much more likely that you're not going to get lost in thinking, because by taking it on as a training and learning and developing the discernment to pick up different things in order to achieve certain goals, it's a much more engaging and active aspect of training as opposed to just saying, okay, just stay with one point. The mind doesn't want to just stay with one point, so this is what's going to give rise to a hindrances. It's going to say, well, I'm going to start thinking about that problem you had at work today, or I'm going to start thinking about that thing I got to do tomorrow. If you give yourself something much more engaging, something that's much more of a problem solving, those kind of qualities will get the mind more interested in continuing with it. The subtle sensations that we covered, this is actually the basis when getting to the full body is to the arising of piti as well. And there's a whole series of cause and effects in the 7 factors of alignment, and that starts with the first 3 factors are what we did there. We did the investigation mindfully, and that's the investigation of dhammas, is awareing of different aspects of the hindrances getting in our way, and that's what eventually gives rise to piti. Now those subtle sensations, if they ever do become a full, they start to become more the nature of your experience, this gets you into the second 4 of Anapana, which is cultivating, and that's kind of what I was pointing at with that aspect of the training, is moving that and cultivating that through the whole body. The jhana descriptions in the first jhana are the idea of, he uses the simile of the bathman's apprentice, who takes bath powder and he massages it with water so that it's not too wet but not too dry, so that it's evenly pervaded with water, with moisture. I think a better example in modern time, because we don't really have bath powder, is making dough. It's the idea of taking flour and you add water, and it's a very fine balance. If you have it too dry, it just doesn't work. It's uneven. If you have it too wet, it gets sloppy. So you need to knead it, massage it. So the idea of moving your attention up and down through the body in different places, because this is quite central, and as it's been pointed out to me recently, I talk about this, attending. Mindfulness isn't enough just to be aware. You have to choose the right things to be aware of. And so choosing the subtlest and more refined state is quite central to many of the Buddhist teaching, and the whole Chula Sunyata Sutta about how to go through the formless states is about subtler, subtler, and subtler. And the 4 jhana states, it's subtler, subtler, and subtler. So you want to pick the subtlest thing. That undermines those formations that are more gross. So if you have a part of your body that's blocked, or like you're thinking of a pain, if you find someplace else that's subtle and you move to it, that idea of consciousness will pick that feeling, and it will start to dissolve and take away those more gross fabrications, and you will, generally this is how you bring about the pacification, the calming of those grosser formations. And so this attending, when the choosing the right thing at the right appropriate time, or for your own temperament. So finding, the Buddha has quite a number of different teachings, and this is kind of like that, back to that military idea what the Buddha has. Like if you have, let's say, maybe anger, is attending to that feeling of metta, and then cultivating that and pervading it. You can actually, that is a tangible bodily feeling associated with that. And the mind and body this is covered in other suttas. It's basically, it's one. And there's one sutta in particular is the Buddha called the body witness. And in the sutta on the body witness, he says all of the meditative states, all the way even through the formless states, are a part of, you can be a bodily witness to them. And I can say from my experience is that really is quite really that there's a tangible feeling to different states of mind that can be cultivated. And when you dial then into those tangible feelings of the body, it will help cultivate that state of mind. So when you actually, if you have metta as a practice, if you then dial into that feeling, you start to associate the two, and then that bodily feeling can be used to help reinforce the metta as well. But it's the idea, it's very quite central, is like picking up the appropriate tool for your own particular situation in your own life, and using that, attending to that specific thing whenever you need it, and cultivating it. So a little bit more on the, we've talked about this, the more subtle, and this was quite central. Like one of my favorite mantras of the Buddhas is Etang Santang Etang Pinitang Yadidang Sabbasankara Samato Sabupatipati Nisago Tanhakayo Virago Nirodo Nibbanang. This is excellent, this is peaceful, namely the stilling of all formations, the relinquishment of all grasping, detachment, cessation, destruction of craving, detachment, cessation, nibbana. Now, it's a lot there to unpack, but this is really many ways of looking at the exact same experience of nibbana, the stilling of all formation, which is basically what we've been talking about. So here we have the idea of the training. That's the most fundamental tool you have, is stilling formations and understanding formations. And then the next aspect of that is the relinquishment of all grasping, upadana. And this is really pointing to the 5 khandhas. This is the panchupadana khandha. That's the 5 focuses of grasping are your khandhas. The idea of grasping the body itself. The idea of grasping your thoughts itself, your feelings, your perceptions. So these, if you underline, when you take and begin practicing and deconstructing fabrication, you're deconstructing those ideas that you can grasp as self. If you pervade and experience the whole body as just one big field of experience, the underlying belief in your body as something starts to become less believable. Your pains become, this is the 4th jhana, is transcendence of pain, and that's actually a perfection of that. I think I've kind of thrown a lot at you, but trying to tie together, like, somewhat of a basis of game plan, and taken on your practice as is understanding how different things work and trying to maybe take apart a few of the terms, because I think they can, for me, for a number of years, they were problematic, not understanding, like, boy, gee, people say the cessation of consciousness, paticca samuppada, the ending of sankharas. With the cessation of sankharas, the cessation of consciousness. Is it some kind of blacking out? Is it some kind of annihilation? It's really it's the idea that things are. The Buddha has a very important sutta, the Kachana Gota Sutta, where he says people grasp things are or things are not. And instead they don't see that they are dependently arisen. And that's what Paticca Samuppada is about. It's like you fabricate your own world by attending to certain things. If you attend to certain stories, if you attend to certain views and opinions, then that's the world that you're going to create. And as practitioners, if we back up and keep going to subtler and subtler, we pull out the foundations of those stories. And they become less powerful. And it becomes a way of viewing the world, as your way of viewing the world is much more on that subtle fabricating nature. And then the stories, they never even arise. So I'll leave that for your reflection.
And Mayam Dhamma Katara Sadhu Karam Dara Mase Sadhu Sadhu Sadhu